Hello and welcome to Cosmological Arguments. I'm your host, John Bannon. Debunking Atheism, Volume 5. In this episode of Debunking Atheism, I'm going to go over the problem of evil and how to respond to it. The problem of evil is a very well-known objection to the existence of God. I've set forth a explanation of that problem, and then I'm going to go through it and explain to you how it is that a theist can get out of the problem of evil. So the first thing is, if God exists, then God is omnipotent, omniscient, and morally perfect. Another word for that is omnibenevolent. Now, omnipotent means God has all real powers. Omniscient means God knows everything there is to know. Number two, if God is omnipotent, that is, has all real powers, then God has the power to eliminate evil. Number three, if God is omniscient, that is, knows everything that can be known, then God knows when evil exists. Number four, if God is morally perfect, that is, omnibenevolent, then God has the desire to eliminate all evil. Number five, evil exists. Number six, if evil exists and God exists, then either God doesn't have the power to eliminate all evil, or doesn't know when evil exists, or doesn't have the desire to eliminate all evil. And the conclusion, number seven, is therefore God does not exist. So the problem of evil essentially says, why would an all-powerful, all-knowing, all morally perfect God allow evil and suffering to occur in the world? Wouldn't God want that to go away? Wouldn't God prevent that from happening? And because evil obviously exists, evil, suffering, pain, death exists in the world, then doesn't that prove that God doesn't exist? Because if he existed, he would stop that from happening and it would never occur? And the answer is, well, no. So why? Why would a omnipotent, omniscient, morally perfect God, an omnibenevolent God, allow evil, suffering, death, pain to exist in the world? Well, the reason is because there is such thing as necessary evil, even to God. So when looking at this list, the flaw is in number 4, and this idea of what does it mean to be morally perfect? Moral perfection can allow the existence of necessary evils in order for the greater good to exist. So God can be perfectly good and omnibenevolent and still allow evil to exist if it is a necessary evil and a greater good comes from it. And that's the solution to the problem of evil. Uh, so I'll explain to you why it is that evil is necessary and the greater good requires it. For example, there's evil in the world in terms of death and injury and pain and suffering and disease and famine and accidents and all sorts of things, genetic mutations, animal attacks, you name it. There's all sorts of evil. People murdering people. There's crime, and then there's also this afterlife evil that we call hell. And, why would God permit hell to exist? It's an evil place. It's full of evil people. So wouldn't an omnibenevolent, perfect God never create hell? Well, the answer is, as far as hell is concerned, hell is the maximum deterrent that God can give us to keep us on the straight and narrow, to make us behave as morally righteous as He can. It's to make life better for everybody, that there be this threat, this ultimate threat of eternal punishment in hell. Um, Besides, after you die and let's say you go to heaven, you don't want to spend eternity with a bunch of evildoers, right? Who wants that? I don't want that. I thought I got rid of them down on earth. I don't want them up in heaven. Well, that's morally justified, and those people are sent to hell. If you go to hell, you deserve it. Um, Jesus is the judge of who goes to hell and who doesn't. And Jesus is a loving, merciful God. So if He sends you to hell, there is no doubt you deserved what you got, and for eternity. So even hell, being evil, is morally justified, and the greater good being that the goodness in this world in life would be maximized. The maximum number of people would go to heaven due to the maximum deterrent of hell. And in heaven, evil would be eliminated because all the evildoers would be in hell for eternity in heaven. Who would want evildoers in heaven? Nobody who wants to go to heaven wants that. You have to put up with all the evildoers today. You don't have to put up with them in the afterlife for eternity. So these things are all morally justified. Okay. So, why is evil and suffering and pain and famine and disease, why are these things necessary such that God would allow them? Because the greater good comes from them. Now, the answer is this um, evil is necessary for life to exist. Now, how can that be? Well, all life is the product of evolution. This is what this was Darwin's great thought, and it's been with us now for over 150 years. And evolution is a process that designs our DNA. All life has DNA, and all that DNA is designed by a process of evolution over even a billion years. And evolution is a nasty business. The process of evolution requires a great deal of evil and suffering and death. Um, the basis of evolution is survival of the fittest, and the mutation of our genes and the propagation of beneficial genes throughout the species, and it even requires the death of everyone in order to get rid of the old genes, so that the new genes you can speed up the propagation of new genes in new organisms, so that they can adapt to an ever-changing environment. So life cannot be created without evolution. Life requires evolution. There's no other way to create life besides DNA and the evolutionary process that is responsible for the creation of DNA. So God has no choice but to allow evil in order for life to exist. And it is certainly the greater good that life exists and that you exist, then that God does not permit the evil of evolution and thus does not permit the existence of life and yourself. So clearly, it is a greater good that you exist than that you don't exist. Could God eliminate evolution? Sure, but that would eliminate all life. And it's a greater good that life exists. That's clearly the case. The evil that evolution brings, that life brings, is absolutely morally justified in order to bring about life, because you can't get life without it. So, in a nutshell, that's the solution to the problem of evil. It's evolution. If you want to blame um, somebody for the evil and suffering in the world, blame evolution. Don't blame God. The only choice God makes is he permits evolution to exist so that you can exist, which is the greater good. Now, um, there's also another aspect of God's power to create that you need to consider, and that is that God's power to create physical reality is an uncaused power. God is uncaused, and God has this power to create physical reality. And that means that that power is uncaused, which means God has an uncaused toolbox to create physical reality. But because it's uncaused, God can't change that toolbox. So, whatever tools God has for creating physical reality, he can't change them. That's it. His only choice is to use whatever's in that toolbox. And from physical reality, we know that that toolbox contains such things as um, atoms, molecules, mass, energy, and these things, these tools that God uses to create physical reality. These things, they have no conscious awareness. They don't know the difference between good and evil. So you can't expect uh, physical reality that's made of things that have no consciousness or awareness of good or evil to behave in a necessarily good way. They're just tools. They're dumb tools. They don't know. So the universe is something that results from God's uncaused toolbox. He uses the tools in there to create the universe. And the universe doesn't care about good or evil. It's created by these tools that aren't conscious. They don't have a conscious awareness. So they don't know the difference between good and evil. And so the universe doesn't know the difference between good and evil. But God creates this particular universe, which through billions of years has a process of evolution on this particular planet, and that process involves evil. But that's necessary for life to exist, which is the greater good. So, to a great extent, if you want to blame evil on anybody, you should blame it on evolution and these uncaused tools in God's toolbox, which he has to use in order to create physical reality, which don't care about good or evil. They're amoral objects. That means without any understanding of good or evil. Now, although God can intervene and perform miracles at any time in the universe, um, by altering the laws of physics themselves. That is, he rarely does that. And the reason for that is that uh, there's such a thing as everythingness, which is God's uncaused power to create um, anything that is logically possible in physical reality. But in everythingness, uh, the simpler things always grossly outnumber the more complicated things. And because of that, miracles are extraordinarily complicated things because they require a deviation from the laws of physics. That requires that's a great deal of complication in terms of the vastness that is everythingness. Um, So because of that property of everythingness, that the simpler things must always grossly outnumber the more complicated things, and because miracles are complicated things, God rarely engages in miracles. So, could God alter the laws of physics to grow an amputated limb back? Yes, he could. He could, but that's an extraordinarily complicated act that alters the laws of physics themselves. And a principle or a property of everythingness only allows those in the rarest occasions because it is such a complicated act to undertake. Uh, for instance, the resurrection of Jesus Christ was an extraordinarily complicated act in terms of everythingness and extraordinarily rare. Um, can God do it? Yes, but rarely, rarely. God is stuck with his uncaused power to create and this idea of everythingness and its property. And that's the way it proceeds. All right, so what are the different types of evil? There's moral evil and there's natural evil. But the thing to remember about that is all evil only exists because human beings or life exists. If there was no life or human beings, there wouldn't be evil. So the fact that human beings or life exists on this planet is what causes evil. If we weren't here, there would be no evil. Now, so understand again, it's a greater good sort of concept that in order for human beings or for life to exist, there has to be evil. So not only in terms of evolution, but in terms of being on this planet, we have to be somewhere. And because we're here, evil exists. So take for example, uh, uh, this illustration. Imagine a cliff. And at the top of the cliff, there's a rock. And at the bottom of the cliff, there's a baby sitting there. Now, this rock is perched on the edge of this cliff. And if it falls down, it's going to land and crush that baby. So, the potential for evil is there because the baby's there. Now, an example of natural evil would be if the wind blew the rock off the cliff, making the rock fall and crush the baby to death. So the wind would be a natural evil. If the baby wasn't there and the wind blew the rock down and the rock landed here without any baby in the way, there would be no evil. It's the presence of the baby, the presence of life, that allows evil to occur, even natural evil. Now imagine there's somebody at the top of this cliff and they push the rock. And they push the rock off the cliff and it lands on the baby and kills the baby. Now that's moral evil. So this person decided to do something very evil and push that rock over. But again, there wouldn't have been evil if there wasn't this person and this baby down here. So again, the presence of a human being is what allows evil to exist. Now, imagine that there was a dog over here. And he was barking at the baby. And because of the baby crawled over to this spot underneath this rock. So the baby's only here because of this animal barking at it, and that created the situation where the rock could fall on the baby and kill it. So this animal is acting evilly, but not like a human being's moral evil. This is sort of a natural evil, but an animalistic evil. So you have a situation where you have all these different types of evil, but the point is they only exist because life exists or because human beings are involved. And if we weren't here, there wouldn't be any of this evil. Now, there are other explanations or solutions to the problem of evil. One of the first explanations is that evil is necessary in order for people to have free will. So, because people can freely choose to commit evil acts occur. And God allows people to have free will, this ability to choose evil acts, because it's a greater good that human beings have free will to decide on their own how to behave, even if it causes pain and suffering and even death to other people or things. So again, that would be a moral justification for allowing evil. That is the greater good of embodying human beings with free will, free choice to choose good or evil. Another explanation for the problem of evil is that only God sees all the consequences of every act in creation. We have limited vision. We have limited lifespans. We don't know everything. We're not omniscient. So we don't know what good comes of any particular evil. So because only God sees the big picture, only God can truly judge the justification of any particular evil act. So because we're limited and we don't have that sort of vision, We don't know whether this evil works for a greater good in God's plan. We don't know. Only God knows. So, in that situation, you would have to say, well, God's judgment on whether an act is morally justified or not, an evil act, is far superior to our judgment, because God has the vision of the entire uh, plan, the entire sequence of history. We don't know that, and therefore we shouldn't judge God for allowing evil to exist. God knows better. We don't, and that's truly the case. We're not gods. We can't see everything behind every corner. God can. God knows the results of everything. So we can't judge God because we don't have the ability to do that. We don't know, we're not omniscient. God knows better. Um, Another explanation for the problem of evil is the fall of man. This is the story contained in the book of Genesis in the Old Testament, where Adam and Eve sinned against God and were thrown out of the Garden of Eden. And their progeny inherited this original sin. And this original sin is what causes people to behave evilly and is the root and source of all evil. So, in that explanation, you don't blame God, you blame Adam and Eve for sinning. And since you're the direct descendants of those first evildoers, then it's essentially an inherited sin, a generational sin that you still have to live with. Um, but then the idea is that Jesus Christ is the new Adam and came back um, and absolved us of all those sins through his sacrifice on the cross. And therefore, by appealing to Jesus, we can uh, nonetheless go to heaven, despite our original sin. And baptism in the Catholic Church is supposed to absolve you of that original sin. There's one more explanation or solution for the problem of evil, uh, and that is this: that everything God does is, by definition, God's will. And anything God does is good or is in accordance with God's will. So you are in no position to judge God. God creates everything. God created you, at least indirectly, by creating the universe, and eventually you appeared. But it's all because God decided for it to exist. So you're in no position to judge God. Everything God does is, by definition, God's will and is good. God even decides morality. God decides what is good and what is not good. There is no objective standard for good and evil besides what God says it is. The Creator, whatever the Creator says is good and whatever the Creator says is evil, is in fact good and evil. And you can't argue with that because you're not the Creator. He creates morality and he creates an objective standard of morality. So you are in no position whatsoever to judge God. So if God decides that evil should exist on the earth or that a hell should exist, God's right. You're wrong. You cannot judge God. God creates moral standards. And by the fact that God creates hell or allows evil to exist, is God's determination that it is morally acceptable. And you are in no position to question that. You're not a creator. You don't get to make up the rules. God makes up all the rules. And that's it. Okay, so I think that's enough about the problem of evil. Understanding the problem of evil is it's a soft atheistic argument, but it's probably the number one soft atheistic argument that convinces people that God doesn't exist. However, there are very good answers to it, which you can use to explain away the problem of evil and explain that evil is really a necessary good and God is morally justified in allowing it to exist. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this lesson and that you learned something. All right, take care.